Okay, let's start. Rav Hamnuna. See that it's in the middle of the page on Samach Aleph and Aleph. It says, so it's the end of a line. Rav Hamnuna Irkas Lituri. We thank Hashem that we're able to learn Torah every day. This was about learning Hashem the base of Mikdash, learning the Nishmas, for Shlema for everyone that needs, and parents Israel. When is the Yartzeit again?
The Yartzeit is on Tiny
Sester. So is that because Tiny Sester this year is a day earlier?
So Friday.
Right?
Okay. This Friday.
Tiny Sester is on a Thursday.
It's Thursday?
I think we you mean that the Yartzeit is on
the day? Time always changes too. So maybe I should find
out. Oh no, you're right. Tiny Sester is not done earlier. Tiny Sester is regular. What's Tiny Sester is
on Thursday.
It's on Thursday.
The Purim's on Friday.
Purim's on Friday, so that's normal. Okay. There's no
Didn't we learn a second Megillah on Friday?
No, it's fine.
Yeah. Oh.
Okay, so Gemara says like this: Rav Hamnuna lost his oxen, so he goes to look for them, and on the way, Pagabe Rabba, he meets Rabba. Rama le Mastisna Dadi. I guess Rabba asks him a contradiction. Says we have in our Mishnah Tanan. It says in our Mishnah, it says someone that worships idols, and it says he worships Oived in Aimerlai, only if he actually worshipped. But if he said he's going to worship, then probably he's not chayiv. Just by that statement alone would not be enough. The problem is Vanan Tanan, but we have another Mishnah. We didn't learn this Mishnah yet. It's coming up in a few days. It says Ha'Imer Avoid Eilech ve'Avoid Neilech ve'Navoid. It also says he's chayiv. If someone says that I will go worship, he says, I will go and I will worship. Or he says, let us go, or we will go and we will worship. That means that whatever expression he uses, whether it's him himself, or he needs to go and do it, or he needs to go with other people and do it, to worship, all of those is chayiv. We see that the saying that he's going to worship is already considered that he's accepting on himself an idol that he's going to worship, which would mean that it's a death penalty. So we have a contradiction. Our Mishnah implies that only if he actually does the act. Yeah.
In this case, the non-Jew doesn't have to be warned.
We're talking about where he's being warned.
No. I know that usually death penalty requires warning.
Right.
And here it looks like it doesn't.
No, it's probably with the warning.
Anyways, do the non-Jews require warning?
We learned that a non-Jew doesn't require warning, but we're not dealing with a non-Jew. This is a Jew. That's so. Amar Lei. So Rav Hamnuna responds to this question. He says, "Why by us is he not chayiv when he says that he's going to worship? He's only chayiv if he actually worships. That's because he says, I'm only going to worship. I'm only accepting him after I worship. Basically, he says, let me try it out. He's not really accepting it right now. He says, I'm going to do a trial run. I'll see if I get a good feeling, and then I'll accept it as a god. Okay. So there's a special exemption over here, even though he says he's going to do it, it's because he postpones accepting it really until after his first try.
What is he trying to find out?
We have a contradiction if a person doesn't actually worship the idol. If he is already chayiv by saying, I'm going to go and worship the idol. That can you see, here we're dealing with something that's called a mesis. Someone is convincing him to worship idols. So the person that convinces him is going to be chayiv, and the person that's convinced is going to be chayiv. So at what point is he considered convinced? So is it only after he goes and he worships, or is it even when he says, okay, I'm ready to go. Okay, let's go, right? So we have a contradiction in that. We have a diak in our Mishnah that says only after he worships. A diak, it's implied from our Mishnah only after, it doesn't say it clearly. It's implied only after worship. But we have another Mishnah that says even when he says he's going to, so he's going to be chai. So the Gemara answers, Rav Hamnuna answered that our Mishnah is not chayiv because he said clearly that he's not really accepting it until after he does his first worship. Okay. Rabbi Yosef says, Tanoi shaklis mi'alma. You're taking different opinions and you're taking them and and presenting them and then posing it as a contradiction. Tanaihi, that's actually different opinions. These Mishnayos are different opinions. The Tanya was taught in a brisa. See, this is an interesting case. This is where the person is not convincing someone else to worship a different idol. He says, worship me. Right? So Rameir says, the person that said that is considered a masis. It's considered he's trying. What's the word? The word that he used for a masis? Person that's trying to convince others. And what's the word that they use? Because of under what category do they put him? They'd probably write masis in italics. Okay, it's fine if it doesn't say. So whatever the translation of a masis is. So Rameir says he's a masis. He's instigator. Okay. Meir says that he's an instigator. Rabbi Yehuda says he's not an instigator. Now the Gemara elaborates. If the person actually worshipped, then kuli al malei pligi. The interesting word over here is do not make for you a image. Now the Gemara learns from that. Don't make for you. That means don't make you an image. Don't make yourself into an idol. So if someone worshipped him, so then obviously he's considered a masis. But keep ligi b'dibur balma. The machlekes here is he just spoke. Rameir savar dibur milsi. Rameir says just speaking is not considered. I'm sorry, speaking is already considered something. Rabbi the savar dibur lav milsi says speaking is nothing. So what we'll have to inciter or instigator, two translations here for masis. So where we're holding right now is that Rabbi Yosef is suggesting that there's a machlekes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda regarding if someone says that he's going to worship. Rabbi Meir says saying is already considered inciting, and so therefore he was considered incited when he says he's going to. Rabbi Yehuda says that that's not enough. You have to actually worship. Padam Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef then says that the proof that I just brought is not so accurate, because what we just did is we brought a proof from someone that says worship me. That could be slightly different. He says, according to Rabbi Yehuda, really words are considered an inciter or instigator. And over here it's a different case. I don't know if it's the Tanya or the Tanya. Rabbi Yehuda says, you see, Rabbi Yehuda says that if the person says, I'm going to go and worship, he's going to be chayiv. And it's a special case over here where the person says, worship me, that he's not chayiv. Why is that a different case? Okay. Why is there a machlekes here if the person says worship me, that's going to be different than if he says let's go and worship, right? So we're comparing here the inciter and instigator to the one that's incited and the recipient of this incitement.
So right? He's liable for speech.
That's what we're saying.
He says, like, oh, I'm a god.
So according to Rabbi Meir, if he says, come and worship me, that means he's trying to convince people. He's considered a masis. Rabbi Yehuda says he's not a masis. But if everyone would agree, according to what we're holding right now, is that if the person says, I'm going to go and worship, that he's considered already, that he's accepted the incitement and he's going to be chayav.
Is
So one of the reasons for making a difference is like maybe if the person wants him to worship him, like he'll feel like more pressure than if he says, "Oh, just like bow down to this rock."
1 second. We didn't explain the machlaitis here. Why? What's the explanation? Right in here, we just suggested that there's a difference between the cases. So what is the machlaitis? That's what we're holding right now. Mar savar makes his lot mishamilei. Reb Meir holds that if someone convinces people to worship him himself, then people would possibly listen to him. Vindakam relay, and when they said yes, kushtu. When they said yes, they actually meant it. It's the truth. Marsavar, the other opinion holds, that when he says, worship me, no one's listening to him. Why are they not listening to him? Because they said, why should we worship you? Let's worship ourselves. If we're gonna worship someone, why should we worship you? Yeah. So the Indikai, they said yes. They're just laughing at him. Which means that when a person is committed to worship the idol, everyone would agree that that's considered the violation. Problem over here is that when he says worship me, they're not really committed, and that's not real. It's so nothing. According to Rabbi Yehuda, people won't be committed to do that. That even when the Mesa says it, it's considered nothing. That's not considered a real convincing because no one's going to buy that. That's the way Tosfos explains it. Yeah. Oh, 1 second. That's something else. That's coming up. Okay, so far we don't have a teretz to the Mishnah. Besides for the answer of Rav Hamnuna, it's when the person said that I'm not using that idol, I'm not believing in that idol until I worship it once. That's the teretz to the Mishnah. That's the teretz to the contradiction. You can't tell me that it's a machlokes, because if people would actually say, "Let us go serve this," that would already be considered that they were convinced. Okay. Masnisin. So how are we going to answer the Mishnah if you're not going to accept the teretz that it's a machlokes? Can be yachranisas, can be rabbanisas. Depends if it's an individual or if it's a public. Yachid, if it's an individual, lay mimlach v'toy basrei. He's not going to rethink it and he's going to be mistaken. So once he says, "I'm going to go worship it," so then he's going to go. Rabbin, but the public, mimlach v'toy basrei. This is the concept of peer review in science. They say that if you because all your friends look it over, so then obviously it's correct. It's so here, because there's a public that's going along with it, someone's going to raise the question, if there was any question there, is this really accurate? And just because they said we're going to do it doesn't mean that they're going to follow through. Someone's going to bring up some doubt over here. But if it's an individual, you don't know how far he's going to go with his thing. He says he's going to do it. It could be he's going to do it. Which system?
Here, they go to popular vote. Here, Torah is relying on like one person, like finally realizing, and he's going to be the minority.
Right. So we're thinking of, though, that you can't consider a person, he's convinced that he's going to worship an idol, that he's totally committed to worship the idol when he's together with a group, because until he actually worships it, we don't consider it that he's going to follow through, because you can't consider that a commitment, because someone over there could bring up a question about it.
They're relying on one person in the group, like
right,
discussing.
Right. But because of a sin, it's a sin, would probably think that someone in there would be awakened, Well, Amar Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef says, how do I know to say this difference? This is Rabbi Yosef that was suggesting this difference between an individual and the public. So he says, because I learned it from the pasuk. It says, don't how do they translate? Don't desire, don't be drawn after him, and don't listen to him. Yeah.
Hearkened?
Don't hearken. Well, is that approve? They say leiseva means approve. Don't approve of him and don't listen to him. Now, it doesn't say leisevu, you all should not. It says to an individual, leiseva, which is an individual. It's talking to the individual, right? It's a second person singular, right? You shouldn't listen to him. Not to him. Him is the singular, of course, but the you is a we should say thou, right, as the singular you. Right? Thou should not hearken or listen to him.
No, nowadays grammatically we combine.
We do you for public for plural and singular, but originally thou was the singular, so this would be a thou. So you see, Rabbi Yosef says, if it's speaking even to an individual, and he shouldn't listen to him, but if he was committed, if he did listen, even if he didn't go, but just the commitment itself, then he would already be chayav. So Rabbi Yosef got from the pasuk that an individual is chayav just from the commitment. Eisvei Abaya, this is typical for Abaya to ask Rabbi Yosef a question. Abaya says, Mishani bein nisis derab nisis yachid. Is there really a difference? You just created a diuk, an implication based on the wording that it was a second person singular. But is there really a difference? I have a source that there's no difference between if it's a public or an individual. Mishani bein nisis derab nisis yachid. We have a brayso that says the following: if your brother, the son of your mother, and the pasuk goes on, and it says, don't listen to him, and what, etc. It says it doesn't matter if it's a individual that's being incited or if it's a public. However, the pasuk does differentiate between if it's an individual or a public, or if it's a public versus the individual. Why? In what instance is there a difference if he's convinced the public to sin or if he's convinced an individual? It goes like this. We differentiate between if it's in the individual that's versus the public. In what way? If the person incited an individual to sin, so he gets a more strict death penalty, the individual versus the public. What's the death penalty if it's an individual? He gets skila, stone. If it would have been a public, it would have been no, it would have been saya. Because the Irani Dach, we're comparing to Irani Dachas, to a city. The city is by the sword, right? The city gets killed by the sword.
Like an inciter doesn't really get anything. Someone incites someone else to steal something. It's the person who does the action.
Exactly, but by Avodah Zarah it's different. Yeah.
Yeah. In this, is it like to make sure that it's your Jewish brother? Because
yeah. Right. Right, but then it goes on, or it doesn't matter, I think. But whether it's an individual or so okay, there's a difference now between if it's an individual that's the recipient of this incitement, or if it's the public. And the difference is that if it's an individual, we're strict on his death penalty, but we're lenient about his money. We don't destroy his money. His money goes to his descendants. But if it's going to be a public that it was incited, then then we're lenient on their bodies. We don't kill them with stoning. We kill them by the sword. But we are strict about their money. Now, Rabbi Yosef is, what does mean strict about the money? It means we destroy all the money of the city. They lose all their money. Now, what Rabbi Yosef just did, what Abaya just did is he quotes a brayso that says that the difference between an individual versus a public is in the following two areas: in the way they're killed and regarding their money. And now he implies from this, it's only in those two areas that there's a difference. But in every other area, then they're equal. Which means, Abai is saying, is that there's no difference if the person agreed to, like committed, or if he actually worshipped. Both of them are going to be the same, individual and public. There goes Rabbi Yosef's teretz. Rabbi Yosef was answering why one Mishnah says that once he's committed, he's already chayiv. And our Mishnah said that commitment is nothing. He needs to actually worship it. Rabbi Yosef explained that there was a difference between an individual versus the public. Comes along Abaye and says, I'll tell you the difference between an individual and public, and this is not one of them. Elam Abaye, so now Abaye needs his own teretz. Kan benisis mipnei atzmai, kan benisis piacherim. Depends if he's inciting himself or if other people are convincing him. If it's by himself, then mimlach, he's going to rethink it. Should I really be doing this? And so therefore, until he does it, he wasn't really committed. But if other people are convincing him, then Garar Basrayu, he sees them going, he's going to follow them. Right? Monkey see, monkey do. Mm-hmm. He's not going to turn around and rethink it. Every time he's going to rethink, he's going to see that they're still going. It's okay, it's probably fine.
Interesting thing is thinking that's not this year, like Mifa. I think he was incited a lot of people to do idol worship, but I don't think he was liable for anything. So they didn't have like Sanhedrin. It was just show there wasn't necessarily like
right. Well, over there it says there was no king. It says a bunch of times there was no king in Israel, and everyone did whatever they wanted.
Right. But he just got away scot-free.
But then later in the book of in Kings, were a bunch of kings that had everyone worshiping idols.
Oh yeah.
And then the prophet would come and tell them that they're going to have a bitter end, and then it plays it out. Okay. Ella Amar Abaya. Okay. So Amar Abaya Mina Aminallah. Abaya says, how do I know that there's a difference between if he's inciting himself or if there's other people that are inciting? Other people inciting him, that means he's going to continue. And when he says that he's going to do it, we're convinced that that's a real commitment. And he's going to get the punishment. It says, don't listen to him. What was the word again? Don't hearken. And something else. Don't approve. Don't approve and don't hearken. But if he did listen, then he's going to be chayiv. Now we're assuming here that because there's someone else that's talking, that he's already going to be, once he's already committed, because he listened, he didn't actually do it, but he listened and he agreed, that's already considered a commitment because someone else was telling it. Rabba says, that's not the pshat. Both of these cases, both Mishnayos, are talking about when there's someone else that's convincing him to worship idols. Nevertheless, there's going to be a difference between the Mishnayos. One of them is when the person says all the praises about the idol. This is the way it eats, and this is the way it drinks, and this is its nature, and this is how it does good, this is how it does bad. It's a full description of everything. And the other one is, the other one is if he doesn't tell him all the details about the idol. Now, where do we get the difference from this? How did I come up with this difference between these two cases? The ksiv, because the pasuk says, when your brother will convince you to worship idols from any of the idols of the nations that surround you, whether they're close to you or far from you, that's what the pasuk says. Mali kreivim, mali rechekim. Why did it elaborate and say whether they're close to you or whether they're far from you? So he explains like this. What he's saying is that you should be able to recognize mitivusin shel kreivim atalamed mativusin shel rechekim. You should be able to know on your own that just like you know that the idols that are right next to you, they don't work, you should also be able to understand that those idols that are far away also don't work. That's the way people do it. They say, oh, something that I don't know about. This probably works. The grass is greener on the other side. because because if you don't see it, then maybe you think that it's even that it's perfect, that things are better. What's in front of you is obviously doesn't doesn't work.
Can they judge other, like say the guy is like a false prophet? Yeah, show me
Right.
to convince them. Like can
Right.
they do that? Like
The way they do this is they have two witnesses hiding in the bushes, and they say, "Tell me again what you wanted me to do," and they and right.
Oh wow.
He doesn't need a warning by the Mesis, right? Just tell me again. Amarav minamina diksiv meleke melehe amashav zakray melech malikray melechek hakam mitivusin shall crave matalam and mativus shall chek. My love. What does it mean that he's telling him that from the nature of those that are close to you, you'll be able to understand that the ones that are far from you also don't work? My love, obviously, over there, when he's saying that once he's committed, that it's going to work, that's because the person told him all of the characteristics of this. Okay, so Rava comes up with this interesting difference. Okay, Ravashi says, let me tell you a difference between the two Mishnayos, where one of them says that once he's committed, it's already considered a violation, and the other one says that only once he worships it, it's considered a violation. There's the Reisha and the Seifa. So Ravashi Amar Seifa b'Yisrael Mumar. The Seifa that says that once he's committed, it's already considered the violation. That's because he's Yisrael Mumar. He does what he wants. He's not an observant Jew. And so once he says he's going to worship the idols, then he's going to worship the idols. The other one, in the Reisha, where we said, oh, that lasts a long time.
Is this one for like the Jews for JC?
Yeah.
JC Penny, right?
Yeah, JC. Like they're Jewish, but they believe that he was the. Is this the same concept?
Could be.
They don't believe they're just.
Yisrael Mumar, you say that once he's committed, that's already considered a violation. Okay. Ravina Amar, it still exists now.
Yeah, I heard somewhere around.
Pennies.
It still exists.
We need another COVID to get rid of.
Ravina Amar Loizu Afsuktani. Ravina changes the whole shot. There's no question according to Ravina. According to all the other opinions, there was a question with an answer. How do we resolve the contradiction? And they gave us an answer. This is talking about this, that's talking about that. Comes along Ravina, he says, there's no contradiction at all. When we said in the beginning, we said that someone that worships an idol, so he's going to be chayiv misa, he's going to get the death penalty. And then we said someone that's committed to worship the idol is going to get the death penalty. We didn't mean that in the first Mishnah that he has to actually worship it. Meant to say we're going step by step. What I meant to say is like this: whether he worships actually, and when we continue with the next Mishnah, we say, or whether he's just committed to worship it. But we weren't excluding someone that's only committed to worship in the first Mishnah, that we now have a contradiction between the first Mishnah and the second Mishnah. We were just getting started. So there's no question here. It's a different way of answering a question. Right? It's not like a question with an answer. There's no question. Itmar. We have a statement like the following statement, which is usually a machlekes. It says, this is probably a typical case. Someone that worships idols, not because he really believes in it, but because someone he loves believes in it, and they're convincing him to go along. Or someone that he's afraid of believes in it, and they're convincing him to go along. So he's going along and he's worshiping it, not because he believes in it. He thinks the whole thing is fake. He doesn't. But he says, "But my friend wants me to do it, so I'm going to go do it." Abaya Machaya. Abaya says that's worshiping and that's chayav. Rava says pater. Abaya Amar Chayav da Palcha. Abaya says he's chayav. He worshipped an idol. Rav Amar Pater. Rav says he's exempt. If he accepted it as a god but he never accepted it as a god. He's just going along. There's like a major halachic implications here.
Just playing along.
Let's see. Simon,
Servant,
he's supposed to give up his life. That doesn't mean that he gets the death penalty if he doesn't.
It's called like nothing about it. Where you have to
Sacrifice.
three instances.
Right.
Yeah.
It says to give the life. How is just because so and so said to do it?
No. Question is, when it says that a person is supposed to give up his life,
Yeah, like that.
but he didn't give up his life, it was too hard for him. So does the best and now kill him?
Oh wow.
He was forced. Right? Right? So
I thought it's when the other people said, we'll kill you if you.
Don't bow down. Yeah.
Now, it's.
no, here we're
it's the
talking about,
Goyim.
yeah, that's not we're not dealing with the case where people are forcing a person to worship and he giving up his life or not. Here we're just talking about a guy that doesn't really believe in it, but he's going along with the person that he loves or he's afraid of, so he's worshiping it, but he doesn't really believe in it. So is that considered worshiping? Abaya says yes, and Rava says no. So Simon Eved Yishtachve L'Mashiach, which means the anointed one, which we'll see in a moment. We're going to have a bunch of proofs here, back and forth. What's the if Abaya is correct or not?
Oh.
Amar Abaya Mina Aminala. Abaya says, how do I know? How do I know that it doesn't matter if he believes in it or not? He's still going to be chayav. The Tanan. If you look back at our Mishnah, we said someone that worships idols, and then it went on to elaborate someone that slaughters to it, someone that offers incest, someone that incense, someone that does libation, someone that bows down. Why did we say at the beginning someone that worships? What were you referring to? If you then go and say all the possibilities of worship, why do you have to say someone that worships? Baya says it must be my love. The person, when it gave us those two options, someone that worships idols, then it says someone that sacrifices an animal or libations or all of it. The first one was talking about where he doesn't really believe in it, and nevertheless he's chayiv. That's why it divided it up. That's why we have the extra case there. It's exactly talking about this case. A Rava Amalach, Rava says, no. Like the Matar's Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah, right after we quoted that Mishnah, Rabbi Yirmiyah steps in and says, why do you have to repeat that clause twice, whether he worships it or whether he's coming to tell me that whether he worships it in the normal fashion or whether he worships it in the abnormal fashion, if he does those services, even though they're abnormal, that's not the way that this is worshipped. This idol is worshipped by throwing rocks at it, but this person came along and slaughtered a sacrifice, and he's still chayiv. So Rabbi Yirmiyah explains the two cases. I don't need Abaya to come along and tell me that one case is talking about where he doesn't really believe in it, and one case is where he does believe in it. That's not the proof. Okay. Amar Abaya tries again. Mina aminallah. How do I know that he's chayiv even if he doesn't really believe in it? The Tanya was taught in a brayso. Don't bow down to those idols. Can't bow down to those idols, which is like graven images. But you're allowed to bow down to a person. People all the time, they bow down to a king. You walk in, you bow down. It's not a problem to bow to a person. It's not a problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gemara asks, Yachal afilu nevad kaman. What about a person that's worshipped like Haman? Now, this Gemara is not following that Haman had a idol dangling from his neck. This Gemara is saying that he wanted to be worshipped himself, not because of some idol that's dangling. He wanted to be worshipped, right? He made himself an idol. He made himself he made himself an idol. He made himself an idol. Right? Okay. So maybe you're allowed to bow down to such a person as well. You cannot worship them. Okay, comes along Abaya. It says like this. But you brought an example from Haman, and Haman wasn't worshipped because everyone believed in him. Haman was worshipped because the king gave orders that everyone has to bow down to Haman.
Yeah.
See? The Leisavdem, the Brisa says that you cannot bow down to a guy like Haman. That means even if you don't believe in him, based on that example, just because of fear. So that's a proof to Abaya that even if it doesn't believe in it, it's still going to be chayav. Rava says Haman like Haman. We used an example of Haman, but we didn't mean all details of Haman. What we meant was like this: Haman that was just an example of a person that made himself into an idol. But like Haman, but it's not like Haman. Because because there was an outside influence that was forcing everyone to do it. But that's not what we meant when we brought that example. Sometimes you bring an example, you don't mean every detail of that example.
Yeah.
You brought that example to show you one detail.
Why doesn't Abaya mention? You're using the term Oved. Yeah, we have learning how the difference between Eved Hashem and Oved Hashem. And it's a whole big thing. Oved means they're really doing it. And here we seem to be using the term Oved actively, but nobody uses that as that this is obviously they're into it. That's my question. I don't think anybody else does.
You don't see that contrast over here.
Yeah, that's
it's only when you see that when you have that contrast, you say this is a Eved, this is a Oved, this is a.
It's not.
It's because we're not using that contrast. Yeah. Abaya has another proof. How do I know this? The Tanya was taught in the Brisa. How does he know that there's a difference between that a person that there's no difference if a person believes in it or doesn't believe in it? If he's serving it, it's considered a service. How do I know that? The Tanya was taught in the Brisa. Kayin Mashiach ba'avedas kechavan. Now, in the second Beis Hamikdash, they had Kayanim Gedolim, but they didn't have the anointing oil. And because of that, they didn't bring the special sacrifice if a Kayan Mashiach does an Aveira, there's a special sacrifice that he brings. So in the first Beis Hamikdash there was a special sacrifice, in the second Beis Hamikdash there wasn't. So when we talk over here about the Mashiach, Kayan Mashiach, we're talking about the difference between first Beis Hamikdash versus second Beis Hamikdash, how he was anointed. Second Beis Hamikdash, this is the Gemara Megillah that says Ein Bein Kayan Mashiach, whatever. So here we're talking about a Kayan Mashiach. So someone that was anointed, and he worships idols. Now the rule is Rebbe Yaimer, B'shigras Maisa. If he does the action, see, this is a complexity of when it comes to a regular sin, the Kayan Mashiach, or the Kayan Gadol that does the Aveira, is only when when it becomes a different law. That's only if he understood the law differently, and then based on that understanding, he then violates it. But if he just makes a mistake, then he doesn't have that sacrifice. So when it comes to Avodah Zarah, does that same nuance apply? That it needs to be that he understood differently, and then comes along Rebbe and says, no, he's going to bring the sacrifice of if he worshipped idols, even if he didn't understand the mistaken understanding, and then based on that he follows through. Even if not, Shigras Maisa itself is enough to bring the sacrifice. The Chachamim say no, behelam davar. It has to be that he had a misunderstanding of what's considered prohibited, what's considered permitted, and based on that misunderstanding, then he's going to bring the sacrifice. Well, B'shavin, but everyone agrees. Shebesira ki yachid, that he brings a seira, which is a female goat, just like an individual would have to bring if he worshipped idols by mistake, right? By mistake, you bring a sacrifice. The shavin, and they also agree, Shem maybe an asham tali, that a kohen gadol doesn't bring an asham tali. Asham tali is a sin is a sacrifice that's brought for a sin that he's not sure that he performed that sin. Okay, now, because we had a machlekes here, what Rebbe says that even if he does an action by mistake, without a mistaken understanding, just because the action was a mistake, so he still has to bring the sacrifice. What's the case? What Rebbe is referring to, that he would still have to bring the sacrifice. Maybe he thought it was a shul, and he bowed down. He didn't realize that the ark, it wasn't didn't have a Sefer Torah. It was something else. So Harei Liba L'Shamayim. Over there, he's going to say that that's considered a sin. He was bowing down to Hashem. He didn't know what was hidden behind there. Ella must be something else. The Chazan Drata V'Shtachvelei. Must be he saw an idol and he bowed down to it. 1 second, he bowed down to an idol. If he accepted it as a god and that's why he's bowing, so then that's not a shaygig. That's you don't bring a sacrifice then. That's amazing. You like Kiblel Belaka, but if he didn't accept it, like Klamu, then why that's not considered worship. Elalav, it must be. If he bowed down because it was like for honor or something, that's nothing. Elalav me'avavir, it must be that he bowed down as a way of worship, but not because he believes in it, but because his friends believe in it, or because he's afraid, or he's doing it out of love, or because of fear. Abaya says, see, the only way to explain what Rebbe was talking about is to explain it the way I hold, and unless you can give me another explanation. And therefore, this is a proof that if someone bows down because of Ava or Yira, that he's going to be chayav. Rav HaMelech, Rav says to you, will say to you, Loi, that's not the case by Mir Mutter. He's talking about over here, where he said he thinks that it's permissible to worship idols. He says the Torah doesn't mind. He doesn't know that in the Torah it says you can't worship idols. Gemara says 1 second. Mir Mutter, Hainu Helam Davar. The Chachamim said that if he's mistaken in a ruling of the Torah, then he has to bring the sacrifice. Rebbe says even if he's not mistaken in a ruling of the Torah, so how do I have a case where he's not mistaken in the ruling of the Torah? It says Ba'imir Mutter Legamri. Here, it's not a mistaken in the ruling of the Torah. He thinks that there's no rule in the Torah at all. Helam Davar. What is the case that the Chachamim are referring to? That's Kiyam Miktas a Bittul Miktas. That's when he knows that there is a rule in the Torah not to worship worship idols, but over here he thinks that in the Torah it's only not to slaughter an animal in front of it. But here I was just bowing down. That's different. In other words, here he accepts that the Torah has a rule, but he's mistaken about the means of violating that rule. So that's when the Chacham would agree that he brings the sacrifice. Rebbe's talking about even has to bring the sacrifice when he just does an action and he thinks that he is worshiping the idols. He really believes in it, but he thinks that there's no rule in the Torah about worshiping idols. Nothing at all. That we're now differentiating between two types of shaygig. One where he doesn't know that there's even a concept of Avodah Zarah versus the Helam Davers. He knows there's a concept. He's mistaken about the means. Okay, I guess we'll leave it here. Yeah, exactly. It's a new piece. I wanted to get into that.
I could see now.